Welcome to What Not to Do. I'm Kyle Schmidt, and this is episode 13. Yes, that's right. We are in the teens. Today I've got with me Father Rodger Patience. He is a third generational priest in the Episcopal Church, and we are going to talk cover letters, resumes, callbacks. Oh my. And he wants you to know you are pre-approved. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
All right. So, I am at Copper State Brewing Company with Father Rodger Patience of the Church of the Holy Apostles. It's been fun. We've actually had the joy of worshiping with you guys, and it's just been a blast. But thank you so much for joining me today.
Of course, it's my pleasure.
Yeah, so it's the afternoon, about 1 o'clock, but we're not done drinking coffee. What are you sipping on?
Dark roast, little cream.
There we go.
There's not enough coffee in the world, so we'll keep going as long as the coffee lasts.
That's right, and I've got the same thing. I think they're brewing was it the Three Peaks blend? Did you see?
High Cliff.
Okay, yeah. So it's good stuff. Copper Rock Coffee does it really well, and at blast. Actually, I think it was episode 4. The owner brewer John Martin's on.
Oh, very cool.
Which is a lot of fun. Picking his brain and leaving the safety of a nice, secure engineering job and moving states to come and make beer.
Wow.
That's a boss. So, but awesome. Well, our listeners may not know you from Adam. Mm-hmm. So do this. Give us just a bit about who you are, where you come from, your interests, your hobbies. You're bi-vocational. You're not just a priest.
Right.
You also work in the private sector. So sketch us out. Who is Father Patience?
Well, I'm Rodger Patience. I'm a bivocational priest and higher education consultant. I work most of the time for a company called EAB.
Yeah.
We used to be called the Education Advisory Board, but everybody just used the acronym, and finally we gave up the words. So we're just EAB. EAB. We're a higher education best practice research firm. So we work with about 1,500 universities all over the country, surveying their leaders, provosts and presidents and deans about what are the top up-at-night issues in higher education. And then we produce original research on best practices to tackle those issues. How do you address complicated challenges like student success and enrollment management in a time of declining enrollments? How do you set yourself up for institutional success, making sure you're making wise decisions, reallocating resources where it's appropriate? I work on the technology team at EAB. I've had a career of working in higher education and hospital technology, and travel with a group of salespeople all over the country. I'm sort of the product expert who's in the room with the salespeople, helping to demonstrate the technology offerings that EAB has. So I've been there for about 5 years, and it comes again at the end of a 30-year career in IT of various stripes.
Yes, sales engineer specifically.
Sales engineer basically is my title,
depending on the company industry, sometimes they call it solutions consultant.
Product specialist or whatever. It's that
awesome.
Expert alongside the salesperson, basically in the pre-sales process, if you want to locate it a little more specifically.
Hey, those sales guys, they need the help, right?
Well,
I'm a sales guy,
I get to kind of lean back and stroke my beard and look smart, and focus on the technology and how it actually works and what do people actually do with it. So I'm a storyteller as much as a technology guy. But all along in my adult life, I've also been ordained. For 21 years, I was ordained as an Episcopal deacon, serving in a sort of assisting role in Episcopal parishes. And then a little more than 3 years ago, my bishop ordained me as a priest so that he could send me to Holy Apostles in Oneida, where you and I met just a few months ago.
Yeah.
So.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. And you married?
Yes, my wife Katrine is a county board supervisor down in Appleton. She's on Outagamie County Board as the head of public safety and on a couple other committees there. And she also helps a neighbor of ours to run a small nonprofit that focuses on research into neurofibromatosis, or NF. It's a tumor disorder in children.
Wow.
So she's active in the local community. I'm active in airplanes all over the country, and then at Holy Apostles on Sunday.
Right. Well, I've heard it said that a full plate is better than an empty one.
That's right.
So,
that's right.
Yeah, that's great. So you've shared a little bit about who you are and a little about what you do. But let's press in just a little bit on the dynamics of being bivocational and what that looks like. And that might be something new, or a lot of listeners might not be able to sympathize with. So.
Sure. So in my life anyway, I am the son and grandson of Episcopal priests.
Wow.
So I sort of know from
That's
the
so
inside
cool.
what it looks like to be a full-time priest.
Yeah.
To have that be not only your identity but also your work. My dad, for example, was priest of many small parishes, and so I got to know the dynamics of helping to run a small parish. We moved a fair amount as kids, and so I got to see a lot of different parishes. And how similar or different they are. One of the challenges, though, that many clergy face in mainline churches like the Episcopal Church, though, is that being a priest doesn't necessarily pay terribly well. And so my dad struggled throughout much of his career. It wasn't until he retired, frankly, that with his pension and a third-time job, he was actually making a pretty much living wage. Wow. So I also saw in the background some of those difficulties that clergy had supporting their families, making ends meet, and so on. When I was in college and I was really thinking about the priesthood for myself, my vocational questions were always like, I wonder if I can do this career and be ordained. I wonder if I can do that career and be ordained.
Yeah.
I studied a lot of the hard sciences, chemistry and geology, took geography courses. I was, thinking maybe I'll go into some sort of scientific field or study. I wonder if I can do that and also be ordained.
Yeah.
And so there was always that kind of two-part question in my mind. It wasn't until I'd actually been through a round of discernment, as we call it in the Episcopal Church, thinking about could I be approved to go forward and become a priest. It wasn't until I'd actually done that and worked full-time for the church for about a year that I discovered there was a different option called the diaconate, being a deacon instead of a priest. And that, in a way, seemed to sort of click.
Yeah.
It was that bivocational kind of ministry by design.
Exactly.
Deacons are people who typically have day jobs or are retired from a career and do this as a second or a secondary part of their life and ministry. And so it seems to kind of click. And so I went through that process towards being ordained as a deacon down in Chicago where we were living at the time.
Yeah.
And so for most of my adult life and career, I've been serving as a deacon in Episcopal churches and pursuing my secular career just like everybody else, and sort of intertwining the two.
Yeah.
So for me anyway, that's what bivocational means.
Yeah.
Some people will use it as a way to say you got to have two church jobs in order to make ends meet. Others will use it to say you retired from your secular career and now you're a minister. I think it's more about the intertwining of two things at the same time. That's for me where the energy is.
Yeah, that's really neat. And I guess just listening, it would make sense that there could be a couple of benefits. Like one, you might, you're not just barely making ends meet, right? You're able to provide for yourself, for your family, which is great, but which probably takes some of the stress off the ministry, because that's a very heavy thing. When you're caring for people and all that kind of stuff. If you feel like you can't care for your own family, and then you feel that tension, it's like that just the financial stress. I think a lot of people might be able to relate at some point in their life where they've had those stressors, and you saw that and you say, okay, I don't want that, right? In that sense, so can I do this? And then the other thing would be, I think practically, you could really relate to people. Mm-hmm. You've been in the private sector, you have the career, you've seen the goofy stuff, the politics, the stabbing in the back, whatever it is that every person experiences just in their normal journey in their career. You're not some isolated, theological blockhead or something like that. Exactly. And that's not a knock on folks that are just are full time or not bivocational. Right. But I think you kind of get the stereotype or that type of thing where you can't actually really relate to what's going on, but you try your best to.
Well, I think of a couple things there. When I was a kid, the picture that I had from watching my dad was that whenever I got home from school, he was at home reading a book. And I'm like, that's awesome. I could do that. I would love to do that. Yeah, exactly. That's a great job. Tell me more about that. Of course, that's not at all what he would do. He just happened to be home when we got home from school. That was a good thing. So I didn't have as a child, I didn't have a conception of all of the work that really goes into it. Yeah. So I think there's that element of dispelling the myths, peeling back the veil a little bit. But I think the second thing is probably common to folks who are involved in nonprofit work. If you're the executive director of a nonprofit, you know the tension of trying to raise money, which is mostly your salary. Yeah. Or mostly the salaries of the other people who work with you. In any business, salaries are the disproportionately large cost. And in a small church, it's my personal salary that is the biggest number there on that budget. And so part of being bivocational is that the church doesn't have to support me at the level that they would necessarily have to support a full-time priest. Increasingly, many Episcopal churches are not able to afford the cost of a full-time priest. And so I can be deployed to a place like Holy Apostles, which has a relatively small budget, because I don't need that full-time salary. So it gives me some flexibility. It also gives my bishop some flexibility to assign me there to a place that could use an experienced priest, but can't afford to pay that full-time salary. So I think there's all kinds of potential benefits there, both for the person, the individual person, having a little bit more freedom, but for the congregation too, to be able to get the experience of someone without necessarily having to pay for it in quite the same way.
They don't have the pressures of feeling like they need to be a megachurch type of thing in order to get together and worship.
Yeah, and from the beginning at Holy Apostles, I've tried to reinforce that idea of stability, that you can bring me in, I can provide the basic things that you need as a congregation just to hold yourselves together. It doesn't necessarily have to be much more than that, and given my time, it may not be a whole lot more than that, but some of that basic worry we can just do away with. That part's just going to be fine.
Yeah. So then, is that what would be the ideal? Would the ideal be that you would have someone that's not bivocational, or is just generally speaking, and every situation can be kind of different? Yeah. But or is there an ideal that says no, bivocational is actually the preference? Or does it? Is there not really?
I think in the Episcopal Church, many of the conversations that I'm hearing these days are about bivocational as a necessity.
Got it.
That we're sort of backing into it by saying, well, we can't afford to pay a full-time priest, so what other models are there? I'm not sure that's the healthiest way to approach it necessarily. But having said that, I think that there are reasonable questions we can ask about what do we expect a clergy person to do, and what are some things that we can do for ourselves as members of a congregation. I'm very fortunate at Holy Apostles to work alongside a deacon who lives in the community and is able to do some of the pastoral visits and back me up on funerals if I'm out of town, which I too often am. So there are things that we partner with that actually work beautifully. I think many people still kind of have this notion that you're not a full parish, you're not somehow standing on your own 2 feet if you don't have a full-time clergy person. There's this kind of inner feeling of a lack somehow. And that's what I'm finding interesting to try to address. What is it that you feel like you're missing? What is it that you're not getting that you can't actually just do for yourself? So what do we think? Why do we think that way? That a full-time clergy person is some marker of success.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Yeah. And it's a question that's 2,000 years old, of course, because the Apostle Paul was a tent maker, supported himself with his own labor, So the model's been there from the beginning.
And that's where it's, maybe so. Yeah, so maybe it's not so much that there's an ideal, but it's what's good and right for this time and place.
Exactly.
As far as the particular situation of the local parish, the people, the setup, and in this situation, it works really, really well to be bivocational.
Right. In other situations, the parish would be much too large for me to be able to do something part-time.
Right, exactly.
And relatively small place, maybe one person can do enough, in a limited time. Yeah.
So what keeps you waking up then and wanting to keep doing this? What's the why? So bi-vocational, smaller parish. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Why?
For me, it's a couple different things. I really love the teaching aspect of what I do in both of my careers. Essentially, as a priest, I'm the primary teacher in a congregation, and everything that I do is teaching. The way that I model my behavior, the way that I speak about certain issues or challenges, what I actually teach about content of the faith, everything is a teaching moment. Everything contributes to building people up as mature Christians. And in the same way, in my work as a sales engineer, product specialist, whatever you want to say, my primary role, honestly, is teaching. But it's kind of interesting that it's two kinds of teaching. Partly we're teaching prospective partners at EAB what's possible. Here's what other universities have done that you could potentially do, and here's what's possible. Let me show you how it works. Let me, paint this vision for you of what you could accomplish too, and teach you how others have done it. But there's also an element of the work which is also teaching colleagues, teaching relatively younger salespeople about what the sales process often looks like, that it's more complicated than they think, or that it's that there are some ways that you might get through it a little more smoothly. So there's a little bit of interpersonal teaching, not just teaching prospective partners. But those are the kinds of things that animate me. Unlike some of the members of the sales team, I'm not as animated by quota and by bonuses and by closing deals as I am animated by getting the word out and having that chance to teach my colleagues and be collaborative with them. Same way at church, I'm animated just by the chance to be with people and tell them some things and demonstrate a way of being Christian in the world that's relatively centered and mature. I would do that even if they didn't pay me. Don't tell them. Don't tell my bishop or my boss. But that's the kind of thing
keep it to yourself.
That's right. But that's the kind of thing I would do anyway, just because I enjoy it so much.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Yeah, so much overlap, and really, you kind of leaning into not only your strengths, but the things that you enjoy, and finding a way to really help others, impact people, and lead them. Yeah, that's great.
Hey, this is Kyle. Well done on your decision today to be great. Those are my kiddos in the background. Hey, if you want more of this kind of content, find me on social media. We'll keep the conversation going. You can hit me up on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, @StartWithWNTD. Again, @StartWithWNTD. We'll see you there.
So let's get into, this is really the heart of the podcast and probably my favorite segment. Everyone has such a different story and unique experience. It's really enjoyable hearing what they did right, but it's also really enjoyable and helpful hearing what they did wrong and then what they did differently. So that's what we're getting into here. What you got yourself into, right? That's right. So as you're looking back over the course of your life, and remind me, so how long have you been ordained?
24 years now, something like that, and been in the workplace about 25, so almost 30.
A couple decades, so wonderful. And so as you're looking over the course of your bi-vocational journey, because for the majority of it was bi-vocational.
It's all been intertwined pretty much all the way along.
What are some things that you look back and did right that really were, you look back and say, man, I'm so glad I made that decision, or I'm so glad I did this. What are some of those things that you did right that have helped to you to see some of the success that you've seen?
Yeah, I'd say there's a couple, and the first of which is I must have been doing something right, because in the 30 years of my career, I have been hired twice by the same company 3 different times. And I think what's going on there is that I'm loyal to organizations and to people that I work with.
Yeah.
So the first time was at the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago. I worked there a year after I graduated from college for almost a decade. But I was there first for about 5 years, gone for a couple, back for another 3.5. And I think it's in large part because I stayed loyal to the museum and to its purposes, and I stayed loyal to Will White, who was the man I worked for. And so when he came to invite me back, I was the right kind of person to come back. So I was working for the VP for Advancement for fundraising at the Field Museum. And he was the kind of leader who would basically divide up the work of his office, and I would go and do some parts of it, and he would do some parts of it. And whenever I was in a committee meeting, for example, people knew that I was representing him, and so I got quickly exposed, to that sort of higher level of management of a large organization like a museum. But I was on a sort of promotion path and hoping to be promoted to the director of membership, one of the divisions that he oversaw. And I was not hired, and not only was I not hired, but my hiring was in fact reversed. He hired me, and then the president overruled him and hired someone else. And I got frustrated. I saw that there was not a place for me to advance at that moment, and left the museum. That was right around the time that I was being ordained, and so there was a lot fermenting in my life, a lot of changes happening all at the same time. It was around the same time that my wife and I were moving to Wisconsin too, and so a lot of shifting parts. But I left the museum, went off and pursued a couple other opportunities, which were not terribly good fits for a couple of years. And then I went back and was having lunch with Will White down in Chicago. We stayed in touch and went out to have lunch with him like New Year's Day. And he said, "Boy, I'm about to start another capital campaign, and I really need somebody in that coordinator position. Boy, I wish you were available." And I said, "Well, actually, I could start Friday. I could start Friday. And so he hired me back. In fact, he hired me back into the same office that I had been in before, and all of my stuff was still there.
Wow.
For the time I was gone, he really had not filled that position except for a couple temporary folks who didn't last for very long. So for me, it felt like coming back to an institution that I was already loyal to, that I had previously enjoyed working for, coming back to work with a man that I was loyal to as well. That it was a blessing for me to be able to come back and to sort of get myself back into a good place in my secular career. My wife, in fact, noticed during that particular period when I was working part-time for church institutions to fill in that 2-year gap, she told me that my preaching was suffering because it was all about church all the time. I didn't have that outside experience to bring in and to reflect on with my congregation. And so, for a number of reasons, it was a good move back to an institution where I had been before. But that was only the first time that happened. And
that's a good wife.
She's very smart. She's very perceptive and sees what's up. But the second time it happened was a little less dramatic. I was working for Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago. I had left the Field Museum to go to Northwestern Memorial to run their foundation's IT department. At the Field Museum, we managed a database of one institution's donors. At Northwestern Memorial, the foundation managed the database of 18 organizations that raised money separately for hospital research and for other purposes. So it was like, database work on steroids times 18. And so I was hired as the IT director for the foundation there. And after about 3 years, there was some budget cutting going on at the hospital, and I lost my job and regained a job with the hospital on the same day. So I was let go from the foundation and hired by the clinical IT department of Northwestern Memorial the same day. Wow. It was sort of like, very dramatic day. But shifted sideways within an organization that I was loyal to. no longer working for the same boss, but that organizational loyalty, I think, was still part of the play.
Yeah.
That they knew I would be a good candidate. They knew I was all in on what the hospital was trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
They just needed to trim the budget over here and could slot me in somewhere else. So that was an interesting career shifting kind of move, because it led ultimately to my joining the vendor of a software package that I supported from the clinical IT department at the hospital, a vendor called Teletracking Technologies that sold patient flow solutions to help with the dispatch and the logistics of patient movement, housekeeping, transport, bed availability, all of those things all of the things that keep patients flowing through the hospital, get them to the care they need more quickly. I got deeply involved with the members of the teletracking staff that serviced us as an account, and eventually joined them in a sales and product specialist kind of role, which took me onto the road. That's where I started traveling about 15 years ago. The third time it happened was long after teletracking. I joined the advisory board company, which was a healthcare best practice research.
EAB?
No, EAB's sister company, the advisory board company.
Gotcha, okay,
I joined the advisory board company in the talent development team, which is teaching leadership development, sort of evergreen business practices to rising managers in hospitals. And was there for about a year. This was kind of my dream company. I had seen an advisory board presenter come and speak at a teletracking conference, and I was like, I want to be that guy in the Navy suit who comes in and tells us all the important information and then goes and flies away somewhere else. I want to be that guy. And so I got hired by the advisory board to do that. And unfortunately, there was a similar budget cutting process going on, and as some of the budget needed to be trimmed at the advisory board company, because I was the most recent hire on that team, I got let go. But I stayed in touch with the career management, the HR folks, and when an opening came up at EAB on the higher education side of this firm, I was brought in as a candidate because, again, my loyalty to the work that the advisory board was doing and the work that similarly they were doing in higher education, I think sort of made me a good candidate. So I was hired back just a few months later by EAB, where I am today. But that was the third time over a course of almost 30 years that I've boomeranged at the same company. 3 different times. It's just a weird thing. Most people don't have that experience. And so there's something there, I think, for me to have learned about myself. That it's for me, as much as anything else, it's about, is this a company that I can get behind? Is this an institution that I can feel loyal to? And am I working with people who inspire that same kind of loyalty? Do I feel like they've got my back? Do I feel like I would do this with them anyway, just because I enjoy doing it with them?
And another thing I'm hearing as you're sharing your story that I think actually probably really plays off or flows out of that loyalty is the value that you brought to that company. For instance, the guy that you're doing some capital campaigning for, your office was still there. Everything was still there. You literally left a void in that company, right?
I'm glad I didn't leave a sandwich in the desk drawer, because that would have still been there too.
Right. And so there's such a way that, and maybe if you're not loyal to who you're working for, maybe that's a barrier from you going all in and actually adding the value you could. And maybe so. This is kind of how I'm thinking. Maybe how these two things play together is that because you were loyal, because you were very committed, it also allowed you to be committed in your work, and allowed you to, in some places, be irreplaceable. Now, obviously, there are some days where you were replaceable, but to your point, and the point of the story is, but you've been with virtually the same company for decades.
Exactly.
Right? And that's amazing. I think a good lesson for us to learn is that saying it's not just about being all in the work. It's also about being all in the relationships with the people that you work with and work for. Would you affirm that?
Totally. I think there's an element of contributing to the company culture. How are you a good player helping to make the culture of your company better for everybody around you? How do you just In the simplest possible way, are you the one who replaces the coffee when the coffee runs out in the communal kitchen?
Right.
Or are you one who walks away and doesn't replace the coffee? Are you one who puts more paper in the photocopier when you're done? Or are you the one who walks away and just leaves it for someone else? That there are small and large ways that you can contribute to the culture of the place that you work.
Yeah.
And that it just helps. And when you're gone, that contribution beyond the details of what your work was, that contribution is also gone. Yeah. And so, in a way, the place is diminished a little bit because you're not there.
And who comes to mind when they need someone that they know they can rely on? That's going to be really meaningful, valuable work. They're coming right back to you.
I wish that I could have somebody to fill that spot, which at that time was a Rodger-shaped spot.
Exactly. Right, exactly.
And it turned out, you could slot me right back in. That worked out beautifully.
Yeah, speaking of communal coffee, it's funny. There's I forget which company it was for. I've had more jobs than birthdays, and
which is pretty much par for the course these days. All listeners hear that.
Right. But there's a sign that said, "You kill it, you fill it." I loved it. So I've been thinking about making my own sign at home, for a coffee maker. Hey, you kill it, you fill it.
That's right.
But no, so that's awesome. Well, good. Really, really good stuff there. So then let's pivot. You didn't do everything right.
No.
And I'm going to guess that because you're human, right? So as you scan back also, and you saw these successes, kind of rise to the top of mind. I want you to do the same thing and just kind of look back, do a retrospective, right? And just kind of think back, what are, one or two failures that kind of rise to the top of mind and say, man, if I could just have that back, or if I could keep someone from making that same mistake, I would give them $1 million to do that, or whatever. What are some of those failures that you've had?
So I'll start with the single most significant, the absolutely most critical failure that I've experienced, but it's related to the things that have gone before, and it will bear fruit in other things. The single most critical failure for me was losing my job at Teletracking in October of 2013 because of my problems with drinking. I literally fell on the marble floor of the hotel lobby at a client conference, drunk off my butt in front of clients and colleagues and everybody. My boss had to put me to bed and then do it again when I got out of bed at 3 a.m. and tried to do it all over again. I flew home the next day from the conference knowing that I would be fired by the end of the day, and I was, and very appropriately. It was absolutely the right thing for the company to do. But it sent me into a bit of a tailspin, as you can imagine, and sent me into recovery, which is the most critical outcome. I have been sober since that day, and that bears fruit in all kinds of other ways in my life beyond the specifics of that failure. But the failure itself in that regard is tied to something I said earlier about enjoying being a teacher, enjoying being seen as the smart guy in the room, enjoying being seen as the expert. For me, pride was becoming a presenting issue. Year after year, in fact, for 3 years, my bosses at the company had been trying to tell me that my personal behavior was becoming problematic. A year before that client conference, in fact, I was on a difficult call with the CEO of the company and the HR department telling me that my behavior would not be tolerated. One more strike and I would be out. But it's a testament to how hard it is for an addict to hear that kind of criticism, that what I remembered from that phone call was that the CEO said, "You're the best at what you do, and if you do this again, you'll be fired." What part of that do you think I held on to? I didn't hold on to the being fired part. I was a know-it-all expert. Deep in my pride, I'm the best he's ever seen, right? That's the part that of course stuck in my mind. And a year later, I still hadn't learned that lesson that I so needed to learn. Being in recovery, I credit with every success that I've had since then. And this is not the moment where we're talking about successes, but I will do the pivot that learning from that moment of abject failure, I credit with every success that I've had since then.
Yeah.
Less dramatic but related is failure that I had when I was back on the upswing, newly hired at the advisory board company in the talent development office. And I was doing work that I hadn't really been doing before. I'm a sort of natural teacher, but I was now being an official teacher, contracted by hospitals and health systems to go in and teach 4-hour workshops on, leadership development subjects like change management and teamwork and accountability and all of these kind of evergreen business skills.
Yeah.
And the process by which we would sign off and demonstrate mastery of those 4-hour workshops was incredibly rigorous. I mean, essentially, we would present back to a senior faculty member who had been doing it for years as though we were presenting the workshop in real life, and we'd be, picked apart and torn to pieces and edited and adjusted and built back up. And there was one particular workshop. I was acing the first couple, because I'm glib and I'm smart. But there was one particular workshop that I did not prepare well enough. I let that glibness kind of convince me that I could slide. I could get through this chapter and wing it. Yeah. And I got called out right in the middle of it by the faculty member who was doing it. I got to the end of that chapter of the workshop, and he closed his book and he said, "That was absolutely unacceptable. You clearly did not do the work. You clearly are not prepared for this. I am not going to sign you off on this material." And my immediate, I remember it like it was yesterday, my immediate response was that defensiveness, that who do you think you are to judge me? And I just stood there at the podium and had to breathe pretty deeply for a few minutes and then say, "You're right." And to say, "I admit that I didn't do the work, and I'm sorry. I wasted your time today, and I'm sorry. I hope you'll let me do it again." And leave it at that. There's no justification. There's no excuses. Yeah. He was exactly right. I didn't do the work. Yeah. What I've learned as I've been in the process of recovery is that, for me anyway, thank God, it's not the alcohol that's the problem. It's the recurring character defects. It's the pride. It's the being a know-it-all. It's those are the things I have to work on every single day. I have to keep tamping that down. Oh, yeah. And this was a example where it manifested itself in my work life, in my work relationship. And I learned in that sense that most people are glad to give you credit if you will own the fact that you made a mistake. Most people are glad to help you move on to the next thing, try it again and get it right, if you'll just admit that you messed up. Most people will take that pretty honestly and pretty well and help you up. So that was another, very much related to the first. Those are two parts of a continuing process of practicing recovery, not just being sober.
Yeah. So a couple of things that I'm hearing from here. And the podcast is called "What Not to Do."
Yeah.
So my job is to try to distill it down into a phrase to be like, "Don't do this." I guess what I'm hearing, and I'd love to hear how you would phrase it, how you would word it. But maybe something like with the first aspect of it is don't feed the pride. Or how would you phrase it in a negative sense like that, passing it on to someone else? Don't do this. What would you say for that first example?
I think something that we were joking about before the podcast began today is this notion of people's opinion of you and people's regard for you. Yeah. And I kind of joked that it's a spiritual maxim that people aren't actually paying any attention to you.
Yeah.
That's really important. And it's a counter to that inflated sense of pride and ego. Truth is, most people are preoccupied by their own lives.
Yeah, their own
They
stories,
don't actually notice you much. So puncture that balloon. Puncture that balloon just a little bit. Temper your own sense of your self-importance.
Yeah.
You are valuable and important. You're contributing to the culture. That's terrific. But the truth of the matter is, in most workplaces, you are in fact replaceable. You are in fact replaceable. You're not a unique snowflake. If you stopped doing the work today, somebody else could start doing it tomorrow.
I'm offended.
You may be offended, but I'm going to share my truth. But it's a counter. It's a counter to that sort of overinflated sense of ego. They couldn't do what they do without me. They probably could do it, and they'd probably get along just fine.
Exactly what I wrote.
So just slow your roll,
Yeah.
And I think that there's also a piece of wisdom that I could talk about intellectually, but I really learned it through this process, which has to do with always being learning, always being willing to learn. There's an element, the counter to pride is humility.
Yeah.
And there's an element of humility which is a sort of willingness to believe that somebody else might actually know something too.
Yeah.
And if you're willing to take new information from other people, well, then you can't be the most important person in the room. You're a learner just like everybody else. Even if you're the teacher, you're a learner just like everybody else.
That's really good. Yeah, so there's a couple things here, and they all build on each other. And that phrase that you use, inflating the ego, that's exactly what I wrote down, is don't inflate the ego.
Yeah, puncture the ego as fast as you can.
Yeah, we've talked in other episodes about certain narratives that we believe about ourselves, and those are really powerful. We've had folks on this show that were told they would never be anything in life, right? And that's a certain narrative they believed about themselves, right? And that's tough to overcome, to have to say, no, there's another narrative I can believe, I can choose to believe.
Mm-hmm.
But in another perspective, a lot of us love to believe certain narratives about ourselves, right? Because it strokes our ego. It's like, oh, look at how great Kyle is. He's
exactly.
Everyone must love Kyle's podcast, It's like whatever it is, and we just want to think, more highly of ourselves than what we ought.
Hey, thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already, and only if you think the show deserves it, would you go over to Apple Podcasts and give us an honest, thoughtful 5-star review? This will really help us in our mission to equip the world for success.
And then the next one, this idea of don't fake it. Like when you were, to walk back through what you shared with your failures, you inflated the ego.
Yeah.
And you weren't listening to the folks that actually
We're trying to
true
give
insight.
Trying to give me insight. Yeah.
Right. And it led to you just getting up and completely winging it. And in a sense, you were kind of faking it. You were relying on your own what's the word I'm looking for? I guess maybe kind of inflated view of yourself and your abilities,
but
you couldn't do it.
You're sort of relying on bluster,
right? Exactly.
Instead
right.
of content.
Exactly right.
Relying on glibness instead of actual knowledge.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's nothing of substance.
Correct.
And it's like, oh shoot!
All of a sudden, here I am,
I'm
the hollow man up here. Yeah, exactly.
Which leads then finally into the idea of don't stop learning.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a great way to sum up that whole thing. I mean, learning in various capacities when other people sit down with us and say, hey, Kyle, this is an issue, or Rodger, this is an issue type of thing. Or being willing to take the constructive criticism. And we can be proactive in that sense of saying we want to seek out and learn. And the reality is like the more that we come to learn, what's the truism? The more we realize how much we don't know, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, there's always more to understand. There's always a fuller picture to comprehend. I remember a sermon once that a former nun gave at one of our parishes back in Lake Geneva, where she gave this beautiful little sermon, 5 minutes, just like this little beautiful jewel, and you're like, oh, that is complete as complete can be. And she said, but wait, there's more. And then she drew a bigger circle, and then wow, I saw what you did there. That was but wait, there's more. And she like 3 times, she just like blew our minds with, oh, wow, there is, oh, wow. You can really take things in a bunch of different directions, And I think if you're willing, it's hard though. It's hard to be willing to receive the constructive criticism that others are trying to give you. It is really hard to be undefended. It's really hard, and I learned that in a very personal way, again, as part of this process of recovery, where learning that some of the issues I struggle with are issues around money. My father never made a whole lot of money, so as a kid, we never quite had the money that I wished we had had, and so I still struggle with issues of spending and of money. And I remember, some short time after I had begun in recovery, talking with my wife about just household budget stuff, not controversial stuff, but I started reacting in that very defensive way that had become a sort of armor against criticism, an armor against learning something that I needed to learn. And I'm thankful that the program had taught me enough to say, I'm sorry, can we stop? Because I'm getting defensive. Can we start over? Because I need to be reacting very differently than I'm reacting now. I had to sort of call time out on myself and say, it's okay. You can do this without being defensive. Right. You can do this in a more undefended way. It's very, very hard.
Oh, yeah. Kind of the analogy that comes to mind is, if you were to fall and break an arm, and you didn't get it treated properly, and you just let it heal, right? It's going to be deformed and not really of much use. In order to restore it back to a usable condition, what does the doctor have to do?
Yeah, break it and reset it.
Right, and that's very painful. Right. And I think it's all analogies break down at some point. But in this case, I think it's a similar thing where we're so afraid of the pain of having to face the reality of the correction, even though we might cognitively be aware of it's going to help me, it's going to be better for the long run.
Oh, absolutely.
I really don't want my arm broken.
Absolutely.
and that it's a very challenging thing to want to lean into those things, which is a point of the podcast, right? Like let's talk about some of these things, not only to the ways that we've been helped by these things, but in order to be able to help so many other people.
Exactly.
That's
exactly.
awesome.
And note to listeners, it doesn't actually get that much easier. It's still kind of
gloom and doom,
sucks, and you just kind of tense up. It's like, oh, I don't want to get constructive criticism anymore.
No
but knowing if you can remember the benefits that you have gotten from previous moments, then you can push through it. You start recognizing that you can push through it. You can be a little less guarded. You can benefit from what people are trying to tell you if you'll just give them a chance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so speaking of what people are trying to tell you, let's say there was, a guy that came up to you. Mm-hmm. Maybe he's halfway through life. Maybe he's just starting out in life, but he says, hey, Rodger, I could see myself in your shoes. I could see myself doing what you do. I could see myself bi-vocational and working in the private sector and also being a priest for a parish here. Can we get coffee? Can we sit down and can I just pick your brain and could you give me some direction? How would you counsel that person to go about down the same path that you took, but in a way to help avoid some of
the pitfalls? Yeah.
Assuming you don't want him to suffer endlessly.
Exactly. That's right.
Sucker.
I think for me the first part of advice, especially around the idea of being bivocational, is to be real clear with yourself about what it is that you value out of that possibility. What is it that you value about the idea of being bivocational? The challenge I think that many people would face is that you have to make compromises in order to follow two paths at the same time. I cannot be everything I want to be necessarily at work because I'm not staying late in the office. I'm not necessarily bought into all of the extra trips that people might take. I'm not doing some of that workplace bonding because I have a full life outside of work. Same thing though on the church side. I can't be many things within the church that I could be if I were full time. as a priest. There are constraints on both sides.
Yeah.
I think they're more than paid for, more than compensated for by the benefits that I see. But you have to start by thinking about the constraints.
Yeah.
What am I really getting myself into? And it's as much about managing expectations of other people as it is managing expectations of yourself. You have to be real clear, better in some ways probably than I am about saying no to things in order to continue saying yes to the two most important things. I can't tell you the number of times that an interesting possibility comes along, or a committee assignment that would just be perfect because I know everything about that thing, but I just can't do it because there just aren't hours enough in the day. And
it's a Rodger-shaped hole.
Oh, it's totally perfect. But no, I have to say no because there's just no way to accomplish it without jeopardizing the most important thing, which is this good balance that I have going on these days.
That's such a good just principle for all of life, right? Like when you marry one woman, you say no to all the rest. You say yes to one, you say no to all the rest. So imagine having to say yes to two women, right? Like, and their responsibilities and all that. I mean, how do you even do that, right?
Exactly.
And it's kind of what you're saying is choosing to be bivocational. You're, in a sense, it's like a proverbial covenant with two different things that are not necessarily, they're taking you in two different directions.
And the hope is that the bivocational life will complement, the two parts of that life will complement each other rather than pulling each other apart all the time.
Exactly.
So I'm in a very fortunate position where, as somebody who travels basically 100%, my office doesn't care that much if I'm doing a little other business or personal business when I don't happen to be on the road. If I happen to be at home on a Friday, they don't mind if I have a doctor's appointment or something. Nobody's like counting the minutes in my schedule. And that's a benefit that allows me to flex to do some things with church when I'm home. So you need to be sure that the parts of your life are going to work well with each other, not pulling against each other. So I think that sense of constraints would be the first part of the conversation. You have to just know what you're getting into and be able to manage your own expectations as well as those of other people. But I think the second part of the advice would be about other people's expectations. You have to really understand the culture of the organizations that you're going to be working for, so that you can work to navigate within that culture. I have to understand the church inside and out so that I can press against the edges and know what the likely result is. If I'm not doing things exactly the way a normal priest would do, I need to be sure I'm doing them on purpose and that there's a good reason why I need to flex in this direction instead of doing things the normal way, so to speak. So it really helps to have clear eyes about the nature of the institution that you're serving. Especially when you're essentially in a bivocational situation like mine, I'm signing up to be a representative of an institution. And I need to understand what those expectations would be so that I can understand whether I can navigate them properly.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I mean, so I grew up in the Assemblies of God denomination, like a Pentecostal denomination, and one of the, I guess it kind of became like I don't know if you want to call it like a stereotype, but like, you'd see pastors or youth pastors burn out in 5 years. And and kind of like what you sketched out, there are so many dynamics. Probably, being a youth pastor probably doesn't pay much. No one's doing that to go get rich, right?
Exactly.
But even being a pastor in various ways, and I've heard other folks talk about. Are you familiar with Nassim Taleb? He wrote a book called Anti-Fragile.
I haven't read that one.
Yeah, great thinker. I would highly recommend it. But I heard a pastor take that concept and talk about the anti-fragile pastor, and it reminds me of just the bivocational path as far as. What happens when you are, so contingent or dependent upon, in a sense, one source of livelihood. Are you compromising what's being taught? Because if I offend somebody and they all leave, then there I go. Or the dynamics are endless. But it's exactly kind of what you're saying on it. This isn't a simple thing.
That's right. That's right.
It's just like, going after and deciding on one career path, and then saying, like, there's so much here if I'm going to take on two.
Yeah. I also think part of it is understanding, especially about bivocational life and ministry, that it's not the norm. And so most people in the church don't know what that is. Yeah. And so you won't fit in the square hole that they're trying to fit you in. If you know that ahead of time, you won't be surprised by the static and the resistance that you get because you're not fitting in the hole that people are trying to fit you in.
Yeah.
If you don't know that ahead of time, you're going to be constantly frustrated, constantly sideswiped, constantly pulled off course. So understanding that you're going to be pushing the whole way along, that you're going to have to be helping people understand this is an alternative way to fit in to the institution.
Yeah.
It's not trying to tear down the institution. It's not trying to say that it's not right or valid. It's that I have a vision that's slightly different, that's slightly askew, that's a little bit off plumb.
And like you said, making sure that expectations align, not just personally. What are your expectations from this path?
Right.
And you get clear on that and consider the restraints and everything. But then also make sure that the communities in which you're going to be serving, and I would assume both, to some extent, professional and then
and pastoral,
pastoral, that those communities are on the same page, because otherwise you're going to be.
It calls for a fair amount of clarity that most of us don't have about most of our working lives. And it's hard won. You learn it by experience.
Speak for yourself.
You learn it by experience. But so many times I think, and I certainly have done this at points in my career, you just jump right into something and you say, oh, this is going to be great, and then you discover, wow, this is weird and it's not for me, and wow, now I know better for myself that this is a path that I can't really follow. But that clarity is in service, for me anyway, of not being surprised. One of my mantras throughout my working life, having to do with using data and having to do with understanding how processes work, is that you don't actually have to be surprised when things happen the way that they always happen. It's a traveling thing too. 6 a.m. at Chicago's O'Hare Airport is always a busy time. The TSA doesn't have to be surprised that so many people are trying to get through the security lines. You could actually look at the data and plan ahead. So in the same way, you can look ahead at the kinds of career paths that you might want to take. You can learn from other people who are in them what's involved. You don't have to be surprised by what you discover. You can learn more, but you don't have to be surprised. Oh, well, they value that, and I'm going to keep pushing against that. You don't have to be surprised that people are going to be resistant.
You just said something that I was thinking the same thing. It goes back to that idea of don't stop learning. And even in this place, like, it'd be really helpful to reach out to someone like yourself. If someone is listening to this and they're considering this path, like, get in touch with Rodger here, or find someone in your community, your area, that can help you to think through these things. Someone that's been down there, because they've been at the top of the mountain that you're trying to climb, and they can give you advice. They might even be able to help you walk up it, and that's really, really important. Absolutely.
All right, I want to know, who's next? Who do you want to hear on what not to do? Which entrepreneur, which leader, which public figure in your network do you want to hear on the show? Maybe it's you. Maybe you need to be here. So let's connect me with whomever, and we'll sit down for coffee, a beer, or even a cigar, and together equip the world for success.
Well, we got some refills ready to go. Round 3.
Fueled up.
We're tapping Copper State here, which is fantastic. If you guys ever come to Green Bay, if you're in the area, maybe you're listening to this and you're, I think I had some listeners from Mexico today.
Oh, wow.
Probably Corey. I think they're on vacation in Mexico. Corey, if you're listening to this. Colorado, kind of all over the United States. But for folks in town, you probably have heard of this place, but you hadn't, because you're from the Appleton area.
I had heard of Copper Rock down in Appleton, but not Copper State brewing up here in Green Bay.
Yeah, so fun. It's good stuff, good beer, good food, and then great coffee. So, which is cool. So come check them out. But so a few fun questions for you. They're fun. So One thing I think about this is that, like our environment matters. When we think of the idea of a rose, the promise of that rose is wrapped up in the seed, right? And so that seed gets planted, and we always expect it to become a rose. And it's funny the way that, that sometimes in life we ignore the promise and we just, well, you're not a rose yet. It's been a day. How come you aren't blossomed? It's kind of goofy the way that we think about, our own development, whether, in faith or just in our professions or whatever it might be. Things take time, and environment matters. Environment's very crucial to helping us to become and reach that capacity or the potential for that promise that was there all along. And so with that said, I think part of that environment are those that we look up to, that we learn from. We learn by imitation, right? Sometimes it's positive examples, sometimes that's negative examples, right? And like we were just talking about off air, there's it's just amazing some of the stories that were shared on here, or that I've heard other people folks say that how they've been impacted and who's impacted them. And I'm curious, for you in your life and your journey, who's someone that comes to the top of mind when I think of who you are and your formation in life? Who's someone whose fingerprints might be all over you in that sense?
Yeah. I think of two people. One that I'll dwell on a little bit. The other it's shorter and sweeter.
Cool.
I mentioned my first boss a year after college, Will White, who was the VP of Advancement at the Field Museum. Yep. Will had a particular gift for mentorship that I've reflected on for 30 years now. And it was really the gift of trusting me as an employee. I was a year out of college, not knowledgeable in the world of work, relatively new and untested. But he knew, for example, that I was interested in computers, and so he dropped a massive database conversion project on my desk one day and said, I trust you'll be able to manage this and get us from where we are, which is a crummy old database out in Wheaton with one screen of flickering orange data about each donor, to where we want to be, which is a relational database, the latest software right on our desktop PCs, right? He trusted me to tackle it and to take it on and to work hard to make the most of it. He coached me along the way, but in a way that is much more subtle than most other people that I've experienced in my working life. He was not a micromanager by any stretch of the imagination, but he wanted things done exactly correctly. The biggest part of fundraising is writing thank you letters. And so I would draft thank you letters for him to sign, and he would return them with every word crossed out in red and replaced with some other way of phrasing that part of the letter. And eventually, it took a while, instead of retyping the whole thing, the letter would come back with a fewer corrections. And I remember the day that the letter came back just signed, that I had learned his voice well enough to draft a letter that he would just sign. And for me, that was a beautiful lesson in how to mentor someone along, not to do it for them, not to micromanage them, not to be breathing down their neck that they don't even spell anything incorrectly the first time, but to just demonstrate gently and consistently how you want it to be done until that person has learned it for themselves. Will was just a fantastic mentor in that regard. He really set me up for a kind of mature working life, I think. And I really value nearly a decade spent with him and working with him because it stood me in good stead everywhere else that I've gone since then. And just in the rest of my life, how do you encourage other people? You're not going to encourage them by dictating exactly what they do. You're going to encourage them by trusting them to be grown-ups and to do the work and to come along with you and to learn from your guidance, but to come along with you.
Casting a vision for a greater version of themselves than maybe what they currently see.
Well, yeah, and then showing them what it looks like.
Exactly. Right,
showing them what it looks like, showing them what the work entails, and being specific. That no, we do it this way instead of that way. We call our clients partners instead of members. Be specific, but trust that the other person's going to come along. They're going to come along with you.
Yeah, and just that idea of he cast a vision for yourself, but he was also tuned to your interests, your strengths, the things that you enjoyed, and he married those together.
Right. And let me work many of the details out for myself. How am I going to do this letter that I need to do for Will? Yeah. How am I going to do this database that I have to manually convert one entry to another, literally with pencil and paper? I'm got to figure it out as I go. But he trusts me to do it, so I'm going to give him my best.
It reminds me of some parenting advice that we'd given was, parenting is really just a process of letting go. You think about, raising, or, when the kids are young, you're spoon feeding them, right? Well, pretty soon you got to let go of that spoon. They got to learn how to feed themselves. It's a process and a path of maturity. They're on the trike, right? Pretty soon you got to let them go, or the training wheels come off, right? Definitely. And you can understand all throughout stages of human development and life. We're constantly, for those that we're seeing in a parent figure, a mentor figure, that type of thing, it's a process of letting go and bestowing that trust upon others, which is life-giving to those that has that trust bestowed to them.
Right. Yeah, you fell off that trike now, but let me show you how to avoid falling off in the future. Yeah. Good job. You didn't fall off. Excellent. So it's that posture, I think, of encouragement rather than a posture that's discouraging.
Absolutely.
But I was set up well right at the beginning by a valuable mentor. Will was just terrific in that regard.
And there's a second one that came along.
There's a second one. It's a little bit shorter story maybe, but I was set up well in the process of recovery by a trusted friend, also a clergy person in the church, to whom I had spoken about issues with alcohol in previous years. And I called him the day that I lost my job, and I said, it feels like I'm just going to be depriving myself all the time. This is a horrible prospect. It feels like I have to give up something that I want every day. And I love him. He just burst out laughing. And he said, you've got it backwards. You've got it backwards, man. Every day that you don't drink is an oasis. And basically, I didn't know at the time that he was quoting to me from the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, that we have this spiritual reprieve that's contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. But the way he put it was that every day can be an oasis. Yeah. And you can choose to live in a way that is not deprivation. Yeah. You can choose to live in the oasis every single day. It was one quick phrase in the context of a long phone call, but it jolted me into a new awareness of what might be possible and where I might be headed. And I give him credit for setting me on a good beginning in that process too.
That's so good. It reminds me of in other realms or industry or professions, I've heard it likened to, instead of deprivation or oasis, scarcity and abundance. Right. If you're thinking like, hey, you've got a product and service you're taking to the market, are you so concerned about what everyone else is doing? Or do you think that there's a lot of room in the market to offer a lot of product and value that you don't really so much care about the competitors as you do about really serving the clients that you're going afterwards?
Absolutely.
So then even at the root of that, tracing that down, why? Why would we look at something as deprivation? Or why would we look at something as scarcity? I think it has to do, my own conjectures, it has its roots in gratitude. Are we thankful? Right. And in that mindset of like, we wake up every day, we're thankful for everything that we have. Yeah. It's really a choice that we get to choose either to be thankful or choose to grumble and complain about what we don't have or what we think we should have.
Indeed.
Would you affirm that?
I totally would. And I think it sets up every other way of behaving across your whole life. So one of the things that I have valued about the organizations I've served in a sales capacity both teletracking and EAB, is that we're relatively big in the market as institutions, and we don't have to be concerned necessarily about what our competitors are up to.
Yeah.
We're obviously aware of what they're up to,
sure.
and we're obviously looking to improve everything we do.
Right.
But we can kind of go into every exchange with a kind of easy sensibility that says, I just want to show you what we're up to.
Yeah.
Maybe it's right for you, maybe it's not right for you, but I'm just going to show you what we're up to. Maybe you'll get some ideas. I'm going to hear what you're concerned about, because maybe those are things we need to think about more too.
Yeah.
But that attitude of sort of easiness is only possible if you're grateful.
Yeah.
It's only possible if you feel like you're operating from a sense of abundance rather than a sense of scarcity. We don't have to be desperate about closing any individual deal today.
Yeah.
Of course, we want to close more deals.
Yeah.
Over time, we will close more deals if we're not quite gripping on with death's grip.
Yeah, and even in the realms of sales, you're aware of your competitors, and you're aware of, so you are looking for someone that is really going to be helped by your product or your service, and that's not everybody.
Right.
And so, really, a large process, part of the process in sales is just uncovering whether or not we would even be a good fit together.
Yeah.
And if not, that's okay. Hey, thank you so much for your time.
And you might be a good fit, but 3 years from now.
Yeah, right.
And that's cool.
Exactly.
We're going to be around 3 years from now. Let's just keep talking. That there's this kind of easiness if you're not quite so desperately worried in the moment.
Yeah, and at the root of that then is choosing to be thankful.
Right.
Yeah, thankful.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. All right, so I know you've been ready for this one. Not the best, but the worst advice either that you've ever been given, or that you hear floating around these days. It could be you're cranking around, you're on a plane, you're heading off to go do some presenting, and you hear someone back in seat 27B, tell his buddy next to him like this. Oh, hey, you should do this, and you just like stop. You're like,
that would be
awful. You do the slow turnaround, right? You're like, you're gonna go all, I don't know, Chuck Norris on him or something. And what's some of the worst advice that you hear floating around these days?
Some of the worst advice that I hear floating around really has to do with the job market and searching for work or finding opportunities, because so much of the advice is basically exactly what I heard 30 years ago when I was first entering the job market. It's exactly what I heard 20 years ago when I was contemplating a move from the Field Museum to Northwestern. It's exactly what I heard 5-7 years ago when I was switching jobs in the process of recovery. It's the same advice, which is almost uniformly horrible advice, which has to do with the state of your resume and the spelling mistakes and the process of correctly filling out the online applications, none of which are likely to actually get you a job.
Right.
Period. They just aren't, because the world has changed so significantly since then that a dinosaur like me telling you about proper formatting of your online resume, I probably don't actually know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And this is borne out in a way by the research that my company does. EAB does research on enrollment for universities. That is to say, how do we target Gen Z or Gen Alpha after them? How do we reach them where they live? And it's not where we lived with typewritten resumes or with a properly written cover letter. Right. Nobody lives there anymore. And so that whole category of advice is changing so rapidly that most everything I hear in that regard is just like,
what's a soundbite from that realm?
So a soundbite from that realm really just has to do with cover letters and phone back every 2 days to make sure that they've gotten your letter, you're still being considered, all of which works against the way the hiring process actually works today. Granted, there are a lot of things you could learn about the hiring process and do better if you're in HR, for example. If somebody does attach a resume, they maybe shouldn't have to retype all the same information into your online application form. But aside from that, this was put into sharp relief for me actually during that period 6 or 7 years ago when I was changing jobs because I was looking for the next thing. There's a guy here in the Fox Valley, Chris Czarnik, from Fox Valley Technical College, who invented a process that he calls the human search engine. And he's actually going to be my first book recommendation, but it's that book called The Human Search Engine, where he demystifies for job seekers the process that salespeople are so familiar with, which is the process of discovery of people whose interests and needs align with what you offer.
Yeah.
And basically he's teaching job seekers the basics of a sales pipeline. How do you just manage your own sales pipeline, which will eventually garner you a job?
Yeah.
And it's a job often that will not have been advertised because the person doesn't even know they need to hire somebody until they meet you.
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of advice
fascinating.
that actually works in the weird world today.
Let's get Chris on the show. That'd be fun.
You totally should. He's on LinkedIn. You should check him out because he's now going around speaking about these concepts. Just tremendous. But that clicked for me in a way that so totally made sense. It was like, everything I do in the world of sales works this way. You just keep putting effort out. You have coffee with 10 people a month, and if one of them calls you back, you ask them, to give you 2 more names, and then you have coffee with 10 people next month, and then maybe 2 of them call you back, and then you have coffee with 10 people the next month, and then maybe 2 more of them call you back. You're building a pipeline of people who know you, who know what you can offer, who are acquainted with you as a person, and getting leads from them, more people that you can put in your pipeline. That's all it is. It's basic pipeline management. But on the personal level, not on the corporate level.
And it's funny because we have all these neat categories and labels that we can put on things now, but I think to some extent it's intuitive to human nature. It's all about a relational grid, right? And somewhere along the way, we've lost sight of that and thought that we had to go through these, processes, kind of cookie cutter style that are probably really helpful for HR departments, but not helpful for actually, for people finding work that they're good at, that they enjoy, and that they can make the money that they want to make.
That's right.
And so it seems like there's tension there that, and things aren't going well. That's why I actually wrote down career letters, resumes, callbacks, oh my, right? Like it's like that type of thing. Like if those are the things that we're supposed to mind, those are the big humps to get over. We're probably missing the point, and we're probably not going to find. If we're not building our own business and we're going to go work for somebody else, we're probably not going to maybe find the work that we really enjoy doing. And you're saying, based off of Chris's stuff, think about it more of like you yourself are the product of the service, right? And you get what you negotiate out of life, right?
That's right.
You get out of life what you negotiate. So think about yourself as that. And go find work that you really enjoy doing and negotiate a good deal for yourself. That's also a good deal for the company. It's a win-win, and have fun.
It goes back to what I was saying earlier about expectations and the institutions that you're aiming yourself towards. At a certain level, you need to understand that the institution is organized for its own convenience and not be surprised by that. Don't be surprised that they've figured out a way to get 8,000 resumes for one position. Just assume that they're getting 8,000 resumes for one position and navigate your way differently. Don't place all your hopes on that one letter and then wait to do anything until you hear back from them. That's another element of pipeline management, which is basically to say, keep putting yourself out there 10 times a month, 10 times a month, 10 times a month, 10 times a month. Over the course of a year, you will get people popping back, but not if you don't keep putting yourself out.
Exactly.
That it's we often, I think, stop too quickly. We get frustrated too quickly, or we pin all our hopes on just one thing, and we're not open then to any of the other possibilities that might actually work out better than we thought. So it's any of that kind of advice that's institution centered. You got to just comply. Maybe you don't. Maybe you just need to navigate differently and swim
the
upstream.
decision maker?
Don't be surprised by what you find, but be persistent.
Yeah, that's actually one thing. So that's one beef I have with data in our day and age. Excuse me. Super helpful, right? But I don't if we're trying to take the data and then we're trying to kind of tell the story that we want with it, then we can miss it, because I don't think, while the data is helpful to form the story, I don't think it forms it completely or exhaustively to an extent. And I think we have to be careful. For instance, you take a look at someone's resume, and if that you just have a set of data. That's all it is. If you don't have the flesh and blood there's all these other components where it's like, hey, what's coming through on paper is one thing, but if you were sitting across with someone having coffee, that person might be like, hey, I really like this guy. Yeah. I think he's raw. I think he's got some potential. He might not have the experience, but I think if we had him in this role and invested in him, it could be huge. Right? But he's not going to stand a chance, submitting that online or to some HR department. And that's where it's like, it's just a fascinating thing. But the data doesn't necessarily tell the whole story. We want to make sure we're good stewards of the data. And that's the importance of, don't just rely on whatever facts you have. Don't just rely on the resume. Don't just rely on the cover letter. Not that those things couldn't be helpful here and there, but you are a walking, living, breathing resume.
Absolutely.
You are a walking, living, breathing cover letter. So go sell yourself. Go get in front of the people that are going to make the decisions, and find the work and negotiate the compensation that you want.
Right. Our company does a lot of work in predictive analytics, especially around student success.
Yeah.
And the work of predictive analytics is not about weeding out students that we don't want to pay attention to.
Yeah.
It's about surfacing students that are going to require more work from us.
Yeah.
And then it's on us to do the more work, but let's try and do it as efficiently as we can. Let's try and do it in a way that's going to have the greatest potential impact. So it's the use of data to surface where we need to help, so that the students will be more successful.
Awesome.
It's always on us as the institution to do right by the students and do our best by the students. Where do we need to focus our efforts? Similarly, it's a challenge for the job seeker, who I think is swimming upstream against institutions who are trying to screen them out.
Exactly.
And so, to the extent that data is just presenting this screen that you can't get through, that's a poor use of data. But if data is helping you as a company to surface applicants that might bear further investigation, that might bear looking at, that's a terrific and interesting way to use that data. But it's more work for you as the institution.
Exactly.
That's where that work resides.
It's good to be aware of the dynamics on both sides of the table.
Well, it is one of my main goals to give you more in use value than what I take from you in cash value. And so, man, I love that this podcast is for free. And I really hope that you are finding just incredible value. Who knows, maybe in one of these episodes, you'll take an idea that will be worth $1 million to you. And that's so awesome. If you believe in this and what we're doing here and you'd like to give, you can go to patreon.com/whatnotttodo and you can give according to your heart's desire. But seriously, every little bit helps in our mission to equip the world for success. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's good to be aware of the dynamics on both sides of the table. It's not that the data itself is bad. You just have to be aware of what's at play, because and in some senses, the company, you want a sense filter out, right? Because if you're a higher ed institution, you don't want the kids coming in that have the 1.4 didn't do anything in life. Now, you don't know if that if that student had a change in life, a point of change, and unfortunately his high school track record doesn't reflect that, or whatever it is. The data necessarily might not be able to discern those things, but I think it can be helpful in some senses to want to filter out what's not a good fit, that side of things. But then the applicant, the student, whoever it might be, also has to have the same perspective and be aware of their data, what they're setting there, and realize, hey, if it doesn't tell the story that you want to tell, then you got to figure out another way to tell your story, right?
Well, and it gets back to another basic principle that I learned at teletracking. We were basically tracking time and effort, and I would sometimes get called in to a manager who says, how do I make my numbers look better? Well, you actually have to change the way you work. You got to walk faster with the patient in order to make your numbers different, because we're just tracking real time, So it always boils down to, you actually just have to change the way you work. if you want the numbers to look different. Yeah, pretty much. That's going to be a constant, I think.
Yeah, that's awesome. I thought I could just, I didn't want to have to do any work. I just wanted,
Oh, man, this podcast about work?
All right. So, last but not least, it is rush hour in every major city in the world. Billions of people, they're probably listening to What Not to Do because Kyle has an inflated ego, right? But they're all, and they're in a traffic jam. This is, this great thing, and they look up at a billboard, and it's your billboard.
Yep.
What's the message that they see?
The billboard says, "You're pre-approved." It's a real story. I was visiting with my dad down in Florida about a year or two before he died, I think. I had just a couple occasions where I got to serve as a deacon at the altar with my dad, who was a priest. And
That's probably special.
One Sunday, I read the gospel, which is the story of Jesus' baptism, where he comes up out of the water and the voice from heaven says, "This is my son, my beloved, with him I'm well pleased." And so my dad gets up to preach, and then he stops. And he says, "Wait a minute, it just struck me that this is my son, my beloved, and with him I'm well pleased. And I want to hear what he has to say." So he puts me on the spot. Thanks, Dad. Puts me on the spot to preach a sermon. After making me teary by telling me he loves me, puts me on the spot to preach a sermon. Yeah. And luckily, on the drive in from Jacksonville Airport, I had seen this credit card billboard that said, "You're pre-approved." Same message. You're beloved by God. You're pre-approved. You don't have to earn it. God already loves you. He's well pleased with you. Now what are you going to do about it, though? That's the leading question. Yeah. But you're pre-approved.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Awesome. Well, Rodger, this has been such a blast. An awesome conversation.
This is terrific.
Yeah, and I really hope whoever's listening to this, who knows, maybe you heard something today that will have radically changed the course of your life forever. And that's amazing. Like, we're sitting here just, shooting the breeze, having some fun questions, getting to know each other, getting to lean into your story. And there can be people who are significantly changed and impacted because of this. And that's why we do what we do. That's amazing.
Exactly. I hope so.
Yeah,
I hope this helps.
Very cool. Well, Rodger, if people wanted to get in touch with you, how can they find you?
I am on Facebook and Instagram as Rodger Patience. And I'm on LinkedIn as Rodger Patience. That's Rodger, Patience, just like the virtue. But you can find me Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and I would welcome connections and friend requests.
Awesome. Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
I heard I was going to get to give book recommendations. Do I get to give book recommendations?
Yeah. I usually do that off air, but let's do it.
Cool.
Let's do it on air.
Cool. Well, top 3 books. I've already mentioned Chris Czarnik.
Yep.
Czarnik. 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 Chris wrote a book called Human Search Engine, and it's utterly fantastic.
So going back to what we were talking about.
Going back to what we were talking about the job search process and finding careers. He's local here at Fox Valley Technical College in Appleton. And he did a Monday Jobseekers Network kind of class that people could come to, and just terrific local resource. So can't praise him highly enough.
Very cool.
2 others, though. I was just talking with a friend this week about a children's book called Alpha Bravo Charlie. It's a children's book, beautifully illustrated. It's all about nautical flags and Morse code and semaphore. And my friend was saying that his daughter wrote him a vituperative note in Morse code. And when I gave my grandson this book, Alpha Bravo Charlie, I think Sarah Gillingham is the author's name, something like that. Okay. My grandson sent me a thank you note in Morse code. So it's a terrific book just to waken kids up to the idea of codes and flags and cool communication.
Almost a lost language, a lost art.
I think in very many ways, totally. And so, my friend lives in Newport, Rhode Island, and so I figure his daughter might be interested in understanding what all those flags on all the masts of all the boats, ships actually mean.
That's so neat.
And then the last thing, a book that I recommend to everybody is actually a trilogy of science fiction novels by a woman named Becky Chambers. The series is called the Wayfarer series, but the first book in the series is called The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. And it's a series of beautiful books, meditations on things like artificial intelligence and what do we do with those who die and how do we remember and honor those who've come before us. Yeah. Just amazing novels. Becky Chambers, The Wayfarer
just like
series.
It sounds.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Awesome.
Yep. So anyway,
those are fun.
Didn't want to miss a chance to throw in a plug for some books.
Oh, absolutely. Very, very fun. Yeah. Well, good. Anything else? Anything else you'd recommend?
No, I think that's pretty much it for today. Thanks.
Awesome. You heard it. So we will have the books as usual in the show notes. We'll also have a few means by which you can connect with Rodger, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and go from there. Rodger, again, this has been awesome.
It's been terrific.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
Man, what a neat perspective from a bivocational priest. And it's a good reminder, if you've got someone like that in your life, tell them thank you. Let them know how much you appreciate their hard work and the full plate that they carry. All right, so let's recap. All right, the first thing that Father Patience told us not to do is don't inflate the ego. Don't inflate the pride. It's just hungry, man. It's ready to be fed. Don't do it. Starve it, right? Pretty self-explanatory. And he shared, from his personal experience, how that led to a major downfall in his life. Don't let that happen to you. Second, don't fake it. Don't fake it. Come prepared. Show up ready. Don't wing it. Don't fake it. He had that great story as far as presenting, in front of senior level executives that know their stuff, have the innate BS detector. You can't fake it. Don't try to. Come prepared. Show up ready to go. And last but not least, don't stop learning. Don't stop learning. This is actually in our family. We have what we call the family virtues, and one of them, they're play off the 3 Christian virtues and the 4 classical virtues. And when it comes to wisdom, which is one of them, the way that I kind of sum it up is never stop learning. Never stop learning. And that's what Father Patience here is saying is don't stop learning. Don't stop learning. Learn from your mistakes. Learn proactively so you don't have to make mistakes, and learn from others. Well, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to listen. And I want to remind you that really this podcast, it's about you. And it's for you. And so I hope that in this conversation today, you have a handful of things that you can take and apply in your own life. Who knows? Maybe there's something that you heard here from Father Patience that radically changed your view on something, or radically altered the course of your life. And that's what this is about, is to help you, equip you for success, even if that means a change of direction, or to help you continue to go further, faster in the direction you're already heading. If you've been helped by this, one way that you can continue to help in the mission to equip the world for success is share it with somebody else. And a great way you can do that is also, if you think the show deserves it, is by leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. That'd be huge for us and helpful to impact more people just like yourself. Well, it's been said that good men learn from their own mistakes, but great men, they learn from the mistakes of others. So go and be great, and we'll see you next time.